The question comes up, who was Jesus? What was Jesus? Did he exist before his human birth? The Apostle John in his Gospel addresses that question in the very first chapter, in the very first verse. And he begins with three common words, in the beginning. Now there's one other place in the Bible that says in the beginning, and you're familiar with that, Genesis chapter 1, verse 1. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. But this beginning that the Apostle John writes about goes back way before Genesis 1 in verse 1. This beginning goes back long before that physical recreation described in Genesis 1 to the time when there was nothing else except God. In the beginning, John 1 verse 1, was the Word. Here's this being, this spirit being called the Word. Who was the Word? The Greek word for word is the word logos. And probably the best way to translate that word into English is the Word. Some would say the spokesman. Nonetheless, in the beginning was the Word, the logos, the spokesman. And it says, John says, and the Word was with God. So John reveals that there are two beings way back there at the very beginning. Not three, not four, not five, not one, but two. There were two spirit beings, uncreated spirit, in the very beginning. And one was the Word, and it says the other was God. He was with God. And it continues in verse 1, the Word was God. So John introduces this important doctrinal understanding that God is more like a family name. And the God family is currently composed of two beings. So all the way back at the beginning, you have two beings that are called God. So God is like the family name. One of them is the Word. Now, it's not till verse 14 that we find out who the Word was and what the name of the other being was. In John 1, verse 14, and the Word became flesh. So who was the Word? The Word was the one who became eventually Jesus Christ. And we understand that Christ emptied himself of that divinity, came as a human being to die for all of our sins. The Word became flesh and dwelt among us, and we beheld his glory. And then John names the second being in that God family. We beheld his glory, the glory as the only begotten of the Father. So we have two beings in the very beginning, two uncreated spirits, the Word, the Logos, the one who became Jesus Christ, and we have the Father. So both are God, but two distinct and separate beings. So that makes much more sense when we go back to John 1, verse 1. In the beginning was the Word, Jesus Christ, and the Word, Jesus Christ, the one who became Christ, was with God, the Father, and the Word was God. They lived on the same plane of existence, uncreated, supernatural spirit. They were spirit beings and still are. He, it says about the Word, was in the beginning with God. So the Apostle John helps us to clearly understand that God is a family currently composed of two beings, the Word, the one who became Jesus Christ, and God the Father.